I'm sure I'm not the only one with some misgivings around Hodinkee. They are, on one hand, a huge source, a wonderful source of information for us in the watch community. They are, on the other hand, a reseller of new watches, a reseller of vintage watches, and more recently, they've just become a reseller of pre-owned grey market, use what term you will, hot watches. There's a lot of, and they have an enormous power in the industry. We've got to the point now where we talk about the Hodinkee effect, their ability to bend and shape the demand for watches, at least in the English-speaking West. And yet that goes utterly unremarked whenever any Hodinkee staff turn up on podcasts or on videos. And they do a lot. Cara and Jason and James and Stevie and Jack all turn up on other people's podcasts talking about any number of topics. But the questions that go unasked are the ones that are the most interesting. The ones that are about, how does Hodinkee see itself? How does it recognize that it has the power that it does? How does it make choices about how it wishes and chooses to exercise that power and influence the way that the market works? I'm constantly annoyed that those questions aren't asked. I enjoy those interviews, but I'm always left unsatisfied. So this is going to be the 5 questions I wish people would ask when they get the opportunity of senior Hodinkee staff. Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville, and I've really done most of my lead in here. This is really the 5 questions I wish someone, anyone, would ask Hodinkee people when they turn up on your YouTube channels or your podcasts. There's no chance they're going to turn up on my little old channel. I'm desperately hoping maybe one of you might get the opportunity to ask these questions. I should note these questions would be the lead into more questions and more follow-ons. This is kind of like my 5 header questions. If I tried to write a list of everything I'd ever want to ask, we don't have time for that. I'd also say that I'd warn you, and I'd probably warn them, at least the first 4 of these questions come with a bit of a barb. There's a fair bit of implied criticism in them. But anyway, with all of that said, these are the 5 questions I wish someone would ask the people from Hodinkee when they turn up in the media themselves. The first one, short and sharp. Hodinkee, you sell watches and you review watches. The conflict of interest is obvious and is routinely remarked on. How do you control that? What protections and what processes do you have in place to make sure you can retain the trust of your audience? That's it. Simple question. Question number 2 is now about the influence of Hodinkee and how they choose to or not to use it. So my question is, Hodinkee, in a lot of your podcasts, a lot of your articles, a lot of your videos, your own staff will talk about the tunnel vision and complain about the tunnel vision of the watch media and the community, how we focus on a very small number of watches and even smaller number of brands. 2-part question here. A, do you, Hodinkee, realize you are the major influence in that? You are the biggest English language, at least, news site for watches in our community. You have the power to affect it. Do you even acknowledge that? And secondly, since that is the reality, and since your own staff keep saying that you would like to change it, what's your plan? What are you going to do? How are you going to affect change moving forward? Okay, so the question number 3, hot topic to do with pretty much any time we talk about Hodinkee, which is limited editions. Hodinkee. The feeding frenzy around Hodinkee limited editions is legendary. There are hundreds of stories of people missing out on getting those watches by minutes, even seconds, equally large numbers of stories of those same watches turning up on eBay within minutes of them being opened up and being flipped. Now that's okay, you're not the only ones in that position. There's a lot of micro brands and other limited releases finding themselves in the same place. I'll note many of those brands are trying things to try and smooth that introduction, to let the true enthusiast get hold of the watch. Maybe they're asking for registration, maybe they're putting limits on how many items you can put in your cart, maybe they're tiering and timing releases. One company has gone so far as to introduce a ballot system. Hodinkee doesn't seem to be doing any of that. Instead, you seem to be reveling in how much hype, how much frenzy you can create. You seem to be doing everything within your power to generate as much FOMO as possible so that you're almost competing one release against the next. How fast can it be released? How fast can we see these coming up on YouTube, on eBay? Is that true? Are you happy with how your releases are going? Is this the game you're playing? Or are you unhappy with this and just not sure what to do next? Over to you. Okay, question 4. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. And this is about sort of what Hodinkee will tell us about things that they must know. And it's Hodinkee. Since the purchase of Crown and Caliber, you are now one of the major players in the secondary watch market. Your media people can simply pick up the phone and ring people within your own organization and find out all the juicy details about how hot watches are sourced, how they're distributed, how these are traded between people. There is no one in a better position to expose how that system works now. Will you? Or now that you're in that position, are you going to pretend it's not there and you're not going to talk about it? Okay, question number 5, and this one's not really barbed at all. And the question goes like this. Hodinkee, we in the West only account for, say, 45 to 50% of the watch market. The other 55% is in Asia. And we have no idea what's going on in there. We're fairly sure that there are different tastes, different ideas, different brands are favoured, different watches within brands are favoured. But we have no idea. Looking at our media, you would think that what is popular for English speakers is all that's popular anywhere. But on one hand, we know that's not true. Now, Hodinkee, you have an office in Asia. You have a Japanese-based office. Is it possible for you, your American office, to talk to your Japanese office and get a picture of how that's going? Is it possible for you to exchange ideas, exchange information, maybe even exchange journalists occasionally, so that people from the Japanese office can come and tell us what's going on with the other 50-something% of the market? What watches are hot? What watches are not? You could have a discussion between the East and the West about how different watches are received. Maybe that would start to explain and add to and clarify why watch companies make the decisions they do at places like Watches and Wonders. You have that. Do you have? It would appear from the outside you have the ability to do that. My questions are, do you have that ability, and could you actually give us that insight? Okay, so that's it. They're my 5 questions I would like to ask someone from Hodinkee. They're the 5 questions I hope that someone one day will ask them. I recognize these are not the last questions. The answers to those questions would open up rabbit holes that we would dive down. But I reckon if you walked in saying they're the 5 things I'm going to ask someone, you would have probably the single most, well, from my limited point of view, and maybe I'm just a really geeky guy, you would have by far the most interesting interview with anyone from Hodinkee ever done. Anyway, what about you? What questions would you like to ask? Or conversely, are you kind of happy that people don't poke at Hodinkee like that? I think there's I can understand there'd be a certain comfort in not pulling back the curtain and seeing the wizard standing, shouting through the megaphone. There's a certain, I can understand why someone would want to keep that kind of mystique about a company like Hodinkee. Or maybe you just go, you've given up. You've just assumed that they have no integrity and you don't even pay attention to them anymore, in which case all of this would be moot anyway. What are your thoughts? What would you like to ask them? Stick them in the comments below. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.